Hello, everybody. Welcome to Little Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel and drop a like. Trying to hit 30K subs over here, so your subscription would be much appreciated. I am talking about the Atlanta Hawks today, which is exactly why this channel exists, because making a Hawks video is basically guaranteed L, just gonna bomb inherently, normally speaking. So that's part of the reason I wanted this channel to exist, so that I could more comfortably talk about these smaller teams without having to worry about investing too much into an upload. We're going to talk about the Atlanta Hawks here. They had a really good offseason. I do think maybe a hair overrated by a few people. I definitely saw some talk that I just I cannot get behind about this team. But I will say, they definitely had a great offseason. They definitely got much better, and they definitely have a chance to be a contender in the Eastern Conference. Now, it is worth mentioning that contender in the Eastern Conference and then contender outright period is kind of a different thing at this point, because the Eastern Conference is wide the fuck open, which means that there are teams that really just I couldn't conceive of making a finals run after this previous year, who now very much have a chance to indeed go on a finals run. The Orlando Magic are another team like that. The Atlanta Hawks are there. I feel better about the Knicks or the Cavaliers making a run like that. The Bucks, even, just because Giannis is as good as he is and the East is as weak as he is, maybe there's something there, especially if Miles Turner just turns into like an all-star or something in Milwaukee for some reason. But the Hawks, there's a window here, and the Hawks definitely said, all right, Trae Young is going to have a player option next year. He could very easily leave us in free agency, so let's just go and dig into a couple of deals without giving up anything major in terms of long-term assets to allow this team to be really fucking good. The other thing that is cool about this is what moves they have made does not have to be the end of their moves. As I mentioned, didn't really give up much in terms of assets, so it could be possible that a star player becomes available at the trade deadline this upcoming year, and the Hawks are very much in the driver's seat to make a deal like that. Include one of their young guys, include their future draft capital, and you can get a guy who is genuinely all-star caliber. And they also have good matching contracts to throw into deals. Guys like Luke Kennard, who they just signed to $11 million. I don't particularly care for the Luke Kennard addition. We're going to talk about each of these additions individually, but that's a very tradable salary. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a tradable salary. Onyeka Okongwu could be a young player who swings upside value-wise. So you just have a lot of guys who are good trade assets, and they're also just good for right now. So the Hawks are already going to be good based on this, but there is room for them to grow even better. But let's talk about these additions. And the main ones, of course, are Kristaps Porzingis and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. The Porzingis deal, they gave up practically nothing to make that happen. And I really like the choice here because, yeah, Porzingis, very minimal value asset, but also he is on a one-year deal. His contract is going to expire next year, so you're going to have all that $30 million in cap space. So you're getting an expiring contract, and you're just getting a guy who, yeah, is it likely that he is healthy for an entire playoff run? No, I think he has shown that that is a bad bet to make. But even if there's a 15%, 20%, 30% chance that that ends up happening, it's worth it in this instance because you gave up nothing to make it happen, and there's no long-term financial consequences paired with it as well. And if he does get injured, like I mentioned with the potential trade stuff, well, that is a huge chunk of salary that you can pair with other guys to get one of those star names. He makes $30 million, and it's $30 million of expiring money, which for a team that could be trading a star could be very, very valuable because you are simultaneously getting that player to a new team, getting the good assets that you can for them, and you are getting up that freed up cap space. The Hawks are currently under the first apron. They have quite a bit of room to go before the first apron, so they are in a good place financially. They do not have any dire bad contracts. What is even I don't think there's a single really bad contract on this team. Maybe like Kobe Buffkin if he doesn't end up being anything all that good. 4.5 is a little high for him, but a $4.5 million contract is nothing in the NBA. Otherwise, you're paying a Kongwu what I think a Kongwu is. I think he's actually probably worth a little bit more than 15 million. Jalen Johnson, 30 million sounds about right to me based on last year, and he could very easily exceed that contract value. Zachary Risache, number 1 pick, 13 million. That's how it goes. He was good last year, got better as the year went along progressively, and I think his potential second year leap is also a big factor in all of this. Not even necessarily that he has to make like some all-star jump, but if he's just like an excellent 3-and-D guy with his height and length, and then he can also finish on the break, do a little bit of creation inside the half court, that is a very, very, very valuable player to have at your disposal, and I think he's going to be very good next year. Dyson Daniels was obviously the big standout for the Hawks this year, most improved player candidate, defensive player of the year candidate. I believe basically broke some records in terms of steals per game this year. Just an absolute animal on the defensive end. And while his three-point shot is unfortunately very, very unreliable, he is a pretty good offensive player outside of that, unfortunately, significantly limiting factor. Your new addition in Nickeil Alexander-Walker is also an interesting one that I'm like not in love with, but also feel good about, where 15 million a year for him, regular season-wise, I do think Nickeil brings you that value. He has, however, struggled to be a consistent three-point shooter in the postseason setting. He was better this year than he was last year, because last year he shot sub 30% from three for the entire playoffs, but that is an area of concern for me when it comes to this team potentially being a contender tier. If that three ball disappears for him, it's actually even more consequential than when it disappeared for the Timberwolves, because I think he's an even more important piece to this team than he was to the Timberwolves. But as for what this starting lineup looks like, it's probably Trae Young, Dyson Daniels, Zachary Risache, Jalen Johnson, and Porzingis. Swap out Porzingis for a Kongwu whenever Porzingis is out, and then you have a Kongwu off of the bench if Porzingis is available, one of the best bench bigs in all of basketball. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is an excellent 3-and-D guy who can really play 1 through 3, slot him in at any spot, it works. Really, if this team's at its maximum health, that's two really good players to have off of the bench. Luke Kennard is someone who I said, again, I'm not a huge fan of, but I think is solid. He could be a good piece off of that bench as well. So you go 8 solid players deep, a lot of versatility in terms of length, a lot of height and length, period. Like that starting lineup with Porzingis, Jalen Johnson, and Zachary Risache, that is 2 6'10" dudes and like a 7'3" dude. That is a tall ass team. So they have the defense to make up for Trae Young's deficiencies on that end. They also have good secondary ball handling. Zachary, Jalen, Dyson, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. These guys are all varying degrees of like all right to pretty good as a secondary ball handler. So secondary playmaker as well. I think Trae will be able to do more off-ball stuff. However, you're not like hard line saying he has to do that with like the DeJounte Murray trade, for example. So I like what the Hawks have done here. And it goes to show, like, my main point when I talked about the Denver Nuggets was like their offseason was all about how like small moves on the margins collectively can make all of the difference in the world. I do think that the case for the Hawks here is like they didn't trade or sign for any players that I'm a big fan of. I'm not a big Nickeil Alexander-Walker guy, not a big Porzingis guy, and definitely not a big Luke Kennard guy. But at the end of the day, they're good NBA players. I'm very aware of that. And they got them for pretty much nothing. I think they traded a second rounder or 2 for Porzingis, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker was just a straight up signing, and same goes for Luke Kennard. So no consequence, no assets were moved. You made the roster much better, and you still maintain those assets for the potential to make it even better. I will say, for the Atlanta Hawks, if Jalen Johnson doesn't break out to be outright an all-star caliber guy next year, then I would definitely look into what a star trade could look like for this team, because I do think that there's just like I would feel better about a more reliable second option to score the ball, but I do like Jalen Johnson. Jalen is probably, him and Reese Shea are probably my favorite players on this team. And last year he was up to 19 points per game. Unfortunately, 31% from three. But like, if he can be a true scorer, if he can play the whole year, most of it anyways, and his 3-point shot can be solid. He's a really good playmaking forward, 5 assists per game this previous year. I think that's enough. But that's the one thing that I'm on the lookout for the Hawks is like, they could be a team that makes a splashy trade at the trade deadline that ends up affecting the result of the playoffs a whole lot. That's it. That's my thoughts on the Hawks. Thank you so much for watching. Shout out to Nick for editing this video, and goodbye.